What is going on, YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the god of war, Ares, and we're going to be matching him up against different gods and just see, well, more specifically, different supports, and just see how he matches up against them, whether it's an advantageous 1v1 in this theoretical... It's weird to word this because you guys want to know, like, who is this god good into? Who is he bad into? Smite's a 5v5 game. There's very rarely 1v1s. And especially in support, there's never 1v1s. I'll say it. There's never 1v1s. But there is some gods who do more against this other god in a 5v5. And that's theoretically what we're going to be trying to plot onto a matchup chart like it's a fighting game. But I'm going to try my best. I'm going to talk about the matchup, why it's good, why it's bad. I'm just going to be doing supports, but if you really think about and hear what I say for each of the matchups, you'll be able to kind of extrapolate where this god is also better than in other matchups against like solo laners, against mid laners, against junglers and ADCs. But I'm going to be focusing on supports. I guess the one last thing before we actually jump right in is there is going to be a little bit of a stress on the laning phase. So if this god just gets dominated in laning phase, it's going to be a lot harder to play this god because it's a lot harder to get out of laning phase. But this god won't have a laning phase against another god like a solo laner, so the laning phase doesn't really matter with this matchup. So I'm going to talk about everything, extrapolate what you will from what I say for other matchups. If you guys do like this video, leave a like, comment. If you guys really do like this type of a video where I talk about the supports and where they match up against with other supports, I'll try to do it for all of them if it is something you guys like. If it doesn't hit, doesn't hit, but you guys have this information out there, at least for Ares. Let's just jump right in. Like I said, we're going over every support available. These are all supports that have been played in the past, I don't know, 2 decades of Smite. So there'll be some that are just really bad in a really bad place right now, but we're still going to plot them down because you might as well. Ares versus Aphro. Pretty easy laning phase for Ares. Very little kill potential for the Aphro. Ares has some good kill potential onto the Aphro just from his straight up damage. She can't really out heal it. When it comes to late game, Ares can't really ult anyone because Aphrodite just is going to ult whoever he ults unless he gets like a 5-man ult. But at that point in the game, Ares has already kind of done his job as like winning the early game and just trying to snowball as much as he can. And Aphro doesn't really stop him from snowballing. Also, if the Ares just walks at you, Aphro has one form of CC to get him off. If that doesn't work and they keep running it down, Aphro's just screwed. Also, these matchups means this is in a theoretical matchup, 70% of the time, Ares should be able to win this. This is 60%, this is 40%, and this is 30%. So this is really good matchup for Ares, really bad matchup for Ares. And we're going to start with a +1 for Ares. I just think it's really easy. Next matchup, Artio versus Ares. I think this should be pretty obvious. Artio's supposed to win the laning phase. She doesn't win the laning phase against Ares. She gets crippled against Ares. She gets ulted against Ares. Literally everything she wants to do, Ares just kind of shuts down. He's also very tanky with his 2, so if she ever tries to like kind of lock him down, she doesn't have great hard CC outside of her really close range stun, and Ares can kind of chain her away. So everything that she wants to do, she wants to get on top of you, kind of fight on top of you, spam her abilities. Yeah, Ares doesn't allow really any of that. Athena, another +1 matchup for Ares. Athena has kind of one way to play the game. If she does get ahead, she can be a little bit problematic where she just dash taunts you and then maybe you die. But a lot of the times you're able to just get your 2 off if you are in like an even matchup and you can just live the damage. And if you really are worried about the dash taunt, you just ult it. Even if you don't actually hear the taunt go off, if you're just really worried that you're going to get killed off this dash taunt, as soon as you hear her dash, you just use ult. At best, she trades ult. At worst, she holds ult, she waits, and then as soon as the stun is down and she's unstunned, she just taunts you and then maybe you die after, but at least delays it a little bit. On the opposite side, if Ares gets ahead, which he should, as he should win the laning phase, she doesn't have really a consistent way to get on top of him. She can taunt him out of flames, but flames are a lower cooldown, so you're trading at that point. Also, if Athena plays too far forward, she doesn't really have the damage to trade with Ares. You kind of need a god that can trade damage with Ares. Athena doesn't do that. If Ares gets ahead, he just chains you. And if Athena ever tries to ult out, Ares can just pull her back in and it's a GG's. Atlas, another terrible matchup. Is Ares the best god in the game? Atlas is same thing with Artio, except he's able to keep his distance a little bit more. He has his 1, he has his ult, which is ranged. His 2, he can be ranged with his 1. And then his dash, unfortunately, is just a really bad dash into Ares. But if Ares does fall behind, Atlas does have good shred from his ult, so he does have good damage. Also in the laning phase, Atlas does have trade potential because he has a lot of damage. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a way to interrupt Ares 3, so unless your ADC can interrupt it, Atlas is just gonna have to sit back and just watch the Ares clear. So not a great matchup for Atlas. Ares should dominate that one. I think this is the first even matchup where it really depends on who your ADC is. Both have really good CC, both have really good damage, and both have really good setup, and they both have knockback on wave that makes it so they don't take damage. So Belch pushes back wave, so it means the archers aren't pushing you or aren't shooting you. So if you're hitting both the support and the wave, you're not taking that damage. A lot of characters, if they are hitting the support, will be taking damage from wave because they don't have knockback. And then Ares flames, he threes them back. Bacchus does have the extra strength of that knockback also being CC, so he can interrupt the Ares 3. So it kind of just comes down to who your ADC is. This is a really volatile matchup for Bacchus, a little bit more than it is Ares, because at the end of the day, if Ares gets ahead, he just ults the Bacchus, and if Bacchus doesn't have beads or absolution, he just kind of dies. But if Bacchus does get ahead, this can be a pretty hard matchup for Ares, but there's always that potential for a shutdown kill because you're just crippling the Bacchus. So I will say it's even, but it's like very, very slightly Ares favored, but I just think it's more even than it is +1. Baron matchup, he can't match Ares' damage. He doesn't have the clear that Ares has. He doesn't really farm all that well into Ares. The one advantage he has is he forces Ares ult, and his ult lasts longer than Ares. So Ares can never really ult you as Baron. Baron also has sustain, which is really good into Ares. And then one of the best abilities or best CCs into Ares is a root, because he has no way to really get out of it. And Baron has one of the best roots in the game with the delayed root. So it's a delay, a slow into a root. So you have this extra long CC where instead of just being like a 1 second root, it is like a 1 second slow into a 1 second root, and the slow ramps up. So essentially it's a 2 second root, but you can't DR the slow, only the second part of the root, which is really cool. But I will say it's a +1 matchup for Ares just because he should dominate the laning phase really, really hard. I'm going to say another even matchup. I think this one's another volatile matchup where if Cabrakan does fall behind, Ares can kill him. But this time, if Cabrakan is ahead, Cabrakan can just cage off the Ares and they can just kind of whoop ass on him. In laning phase, it's just kind of who has the better ADC or the stronger ADC in the early game. Cabrakan's got his 3, which groups waves, and also Ares can't really get out of it. He also can stun the Ares with 2 of his abilities out of his flames. Cabrakan does not care about chains, as he has a slow immunity on his 1 and he does not have a dash. And then if Ares actually ults Cabrakan and Cabrakan is thinking he's going to get all in and he needs to save himself, he can actually wall off the Ares so he doesn't go nearly as far as Ares would want him to go, which is pretty good for Cabrakan. Overall, I think it's an even matchup, but it's just whoever gets ahead, whoever has the better ADC. I'm gonna put Serb into even. Serb is just a bad character now, but let's pretend in a perfect world that Serb isn't one of the worst guardians in the game. In the perfect world where, you know, Serb gets a few buffs, this is actually a pretty decent matchup for Serb. He is a god that can match Ares' damage. He has a CC that's hard to hit, but if he can hit it consistently, it's a very, very easy matchup for him. The problem is you have to hit it with consistency. If you hit it 50% of the time, I mean, it's fine. You'll probably lose lane. He's also got a slow into a Prot Red, which is really good into Ares. And his jump, he's not all too reliant on, because at the end of the day, if he needs to get away, he can just ult first and then get distance that way. But still, Ares does have the benefit of his 3 is knock immune against Serb. So if Serb doesn't stun him out of his 3 or he doesn't get the 3 on cooldown first, you can never ult the Ares. Also, Ares can just ult Serb ult in response, and Ares ult lasts like 0.5 seconds longer because it's in response. So it's always going to be a good matchup for Ares. But it's also, if Ares ults Serb, Serb can also then ult Ares, and then he can immune it. So it's a little 50-50. I do think it's slightly Ares favored. Maybe I do +1 just because of how bad Serb is. But it's okay. It's fine. Charon versus Ares. I think this is a really even matchup. I do think this is one that Charon can win pretty easily. But I think Ares' damage in the early game is so strong that it's tough. It's tough to play into. Charon doesn't really have that much damage. He just has interrupt from his 1, the silence, and then he's got the shield, which makes it so you're not really doing as much damage, but you're making yourself tankier, so their damage doesn't matter as much because you're having a shield. At the end of the day, I think this matchup is slightly to Charon just because of how good his late game is compared to Ares. Ares is one of the worst late game gods for Guardians because he just kind of dies and he doesn't really get any of his damage off. Charon on the opposite side, he lives very easily. He's got a lot of good, useful abilities late game, and then his ult is just super impactful because he doesn't have to get up close to be impactful like Ares. He also trades poke really, really well with his 2, and in the mid game, if Ares ever kind of misses a chain, you can kind of just harass him and even like run him down, and you never have a worry as long as you're holding ult for Ares ult. So I think this is maybe the first Charon advantage matchup, but you always have the in the back pocket if Ares hits chain onto the Charon, it's a little risky for him. But again, if Charon is fighting the Ares in that scenario where they're both hitting each other and their teams are like collapsing on them, Charon actually still fights well into it because his 2 gives him a massive shield. So even though he's crippled, he's going to be very, very survivable. And then he's going to try to kill the Ares. So it kind of just depends on whose team is a little bit more impactful. I've convinced myself. We're going to do Charon has a slightly better advantage here. And we're going to do gods that are actually support. So I guess we'll toss these 2 at the end because nobody's playing these 2 gods ever. Eset. This could be an okay matchup for Eset. I think she kind of is in the same spot that Serb is, where if she gets ahead, and if she's a useful character, it could be a really good matchup. Unfortunately, she's not that good in support right now. She's gotten a lot of nerfs. Her 1 is like Ares 3, where it pushes back waves. So if you're hitting the support and the wave, you don't have to worry about taking that damage. She also has 2 ways to stop Ares 3. So past level 3, Ares actually has a hard time killing the Eset. But he should always have the push still just because of the threat of his damage. But it also comes down to mid-game. Eset is a very hard character to deal with because her 3v3 is very strong. It's very hard to burst her. She has a lot of like good trading potential with her 1-2-3. The downside is she has no CC immunity, so Ares just walks up, ults her, chain, and there's usually enough damage to kill. But still, not a horrible matchup for Eset, but it's definitely not great. The first matchup that I think is actually pretty easily in favor of Fafnir into Ares. You have such a free way to interrupt Ares' flames. All you have to do is stun him, and then you can jump onto the enemy ADC to disarm, and then you and your ally should easily be able to win that trade because they don't have auto attacks from their ADC, and their support can no longer clear the wave or group it for their ADC. As long as your ADC is a decent character and it's not playing like Jing Wei, you should be able to win this matchup. Unfortunately, if you're playing Jing Wei, you're probably losing any matchup. It doesn't even matter. Faf also, when it comes to late game, one stun onto an Ares could either mean death or it could mean just super low on the Ares and he's forced to reset. Fafnir doesn't really care all too much about the cripple. All he has to do is just ult it, and there's really easy outplay with Fafnir where if he does get crippled and he's worried about dying, he drops ult. Usually if you're out of position, you're probably dying anyway, but if your allies are close enough to take the fight, Fafnir wastes enough time. If they look to kill Fafnir right after and then the Ares ults him, Fafnir jumps away and then detransforms and he's CC immune again, making the Ares ult kind of useless. Also, if it comes to late game team fights, a Fafnir dragon pulling in the fire pit and Ares tries to walk up usually just means a stun onto the Ares and Ares dies because of the prot shred and the slow and the stun. So a pretty favorable matchup for Fafnir. It is a little dependent on your ADC because of just how strong Ares is in laning phase, but I still think Fafnir wins this one. Fenrir, a horrible matchup for Fenrir, and we'll do this one too. Serqet, both just terrible matchups. They rely on their mobility. They rely on just being able to kill the person that they are ulting. Ares lives well enough. He can also trade ult if he ever gets ulted, and then he usually can just live it. And then a lot of times they're trying to kill the enemy squishy. Ares 2 gives a ton of protections to his ally squishies, just making them a lot harder to kill. Also, these guys are just not in a great spot for support, so we'll put them into +2. Ganesh. I think this one is Ganesh favored slightly, but I do think this one's a little close, and it just comes down to if Ganesh gets ulted by Ares, he's usually dying. The good thing about Ganesh, though, is if you're playing with your team and Ares ults you and they're looking to blow you up, if you can drop a good ult even while you're getting ulted by Ares, you can get enough damage off where your team is trading 1-for-1 a lot of the times, or even 1-for-2. Because if Ares is trying to kill you, you drop ult on the enemy backliners, whether it's jungle mid in a 3v3 or mid ADC in a late game 5v5. Usually you're giving your team enough of an opening or enough damage onto the backline and prot shred that your team can maybe just win the fight after. Ganesh also can silence Ares out of his 2, or out of his 3, I mean. Ganesh can also dash him to interrupt it also if he needs to. He's got okay clear, nowhere near as good as Ares, but he can interrupt Ares' clear. A little dependent on ADCs, but I think Ganesh just has a good matchup in Ares overall. Geb, not a great matchup for Geb. He's going to get pushed under tower the entire game. His one form of mobility is very slow, so if he gets chained, or if he starts his rollout, he can easily get chained and have it interrupted. Not a great matchup at all for Geb. If Geb ults, Ares usually is just trading ult because you can react to it. He has no way to interrupt Ares' flames in laning phase. I might have even talked myself into a +2. You can't Geb shield Ares' pull. You can Geb shield the stun after, though. And then a lot of the times you're just forced into ulting the Ares ult, which does not feel great because you're just hitting a one-man ult, or you're hitting nobody as you're walking away. Hell, I think it's an even matchup. Hell has a pretty solid laning phase where a lot of the times if she gets poked out, she can just sustain to full. Ares can't really trade all too well with her because he doesn't have the damage to fully commit to her. Once she hits level 4, she should have a point into her CC immunity, meaning Ares can never, ever pull an ally unless Hell is just not there. Everything about this matchup should say that Hell has a good matchup here, but Ares still has a very good laning phase where he can just farm up. And then if Ares gets ahead, it doesn't really matter if Hell can kind of sustain the pressure that Ares will output in like a 3v3 and stuff like that. Will just be insurmountable. I also don't think Hell's build is too good right now, so it's just in favor of Ares in that scenario. I do think if Hell gets a few buffs or if her build feels a little bit better, she could be in a plus or a -1. But I think for now, I'd say it's pretty even. Hercules, not a good matchup. Everything Herc wants to do, he wants to use his mobility and stuff to be able to pluck the enemy front line or the enemy back line, pull relics, blink in, stuff like that, and then use his dash. Ares kind of shuts down. Ares also has a pretty free laning phase a lot of times. If Herc ever dashes to interrupt Ares 3, Ares just chains him and they look to kill him. If Ares thinks Herc's walking up to pluck him, Ares just uses his 3. Pretty hard matchup for Herc. I've never liked this matchup. It's one of the hardest ones for Herc to play other than Ymir, which is really hard for Herc to play, but I do not like it into Ares either. Horus. I'm going to put it in even because this is a really skill reliant matchup where the Ares has all the world in his palm and all he needs to do is hit his chains. And if he can consistently hit chains, he will shut down the Horus. The problem is if you miss chains, Horus kind of just kills you because you don't have a quick dash to get away from him. He prot shreds, he knocks you up for 6 seconds, and then he also is, if he knows your chains are down, he also is not threatened at all, and he can just 3 away. Very hard matchup for Ares, very skill dependent. Ares still does kind of win just laning phase outright, just if he has a good ADC with him. But the problem is if he doesn't have a good ADC with him, Horus just jukes around, kind of waits for Ares to start chaining, and then by positioning, Ares kind of has to back up, meaning Horus can push into the wave a little bit, meaning that a lot of the times Horus kind of gets lane pressure, even though Ares has a really strong laning phase. But I do think this is even because it's really skill reliant, but I think either one can kind of dominate this one just because of how volatile it is. Khepri, I think this is a matchup that's not as bad as people think. I do think Ares wins it. Ares kind of wins the laning phase and stuff, but Khepri kind of doesn't mind losing laning phase just because of how he plays. And he also just wins late game versus Ares. He builds Magi's at a point, and Ares is not a god that can force Magi's. It's kind of the same thing as Ganesh, but the difference is Ganesh has that big ult to kind of turn a fight, while Khepri's ult is mostly just ulting himself or ulting an ally. Also, if Khepri ever hits a 2 pull onto Ares, a lot of the time it just results in death, or he hits a 3-2 onto the Ares, and that can result in death. But I still think this is Ares-sided. I just think Khepri's matchup into him is not as bad as expected. Kumbha. I think Ares just wins this one pretty easily just because of how bad of a character Kumbha is. Ares groups the wave. Kumbha doesn't really clear at all. Kumbha does have really good CC into Ares. Mez, if he ever gets chained one time, he also can root the Ares if they want to try to kill him. His ult is always fine being traded for another ult almost in the entire game just because of how low cooldown Kumbha ult is. The downside is a lot of times Ares is just going to have a lead from laning phase just because of how good his laning phase is and how bad Kumbha's is. But in the mid game or even in the early game, if Kumbha gets a gank set up, he has very, very easy kill potential onto the Ares just because of his CCs and his slows. I still think it's Ares-sided, but it's Kumbha can live this one. Kuzenbo. Pretty easy Ares-sided. He has a way to interrupt Ares 3, but if he uses it kind of like Herc, he will just get chained and kind of all in. I think he's just slightly tankier than Herc, so it doesn't feel as bad. Late game, they both want to be diving. I think Kuzenbo dives a little bit better, so that's slightly in favor of Kuzenbo. But Ares cripple kind of shuts down what Kuzenbo wants to do, which is just perma pushing. And then I think mid games are very weird for Kuzenbo and Ares because they both want to do the same thing, but Ares just kind of does it better because its damage is better. Kuzenbo needs to get that full level 20, get his abilities having really good base damage, and then just having the cooldown reset from his 2. Ares is fine in that early mid game where his chains just have some points into them and his 3 just has some points into him and maybe his 2. I think this is Ares-sided, but I think Kuzenbo could be okay in it. I think this is a horrible matchup for Maui. Everything Maui kind of wants to do, his jump is the same as Kuzenbo and Herc, where he has to jump in to stun the Ares out of his 3. And if he does that, he's going to get chained. He also very easily gets his jump interrupted by chains. If Maui ult and Ares knows he's going to ult, he just trades ult and Ares lasts longer, so Maui gets pulled in. Maui does have good clear, but it's not good enough because Ares is so much better. Late game, if Maui just wants to ult the Ares and try to kill him, he has to wait for flames and ult to be down. Otherwise, Ares is just going to trade one of those abilities. Overall, very tough matchup for Maui. Also, Maui's 2, he wants to pull his allies to him. If they're crippled, though, they can't pull the allies. So Ares just kind of smokes Maui. Ne Zha. I'm going to put Ne Zha on even because if this character was a little bit better, I think he'd be... Actually, no, it's just because the character's so bad, I have to put him in +1. But he interrupts Ares' abilities. He doesn't really care about Ares' cripple because he just kind of runs away and then heals. Laning phase should still go in favor of Ares just because of Ares' damage. But late game, Ne Zha has a lot of ways to survive. He can ult an enemy backliner as Ares ults him and immune it and also bring an enemy backliner into the air or just pull a relic. So overall, just a pretty easy matchup for Ne Zha. I do think Ares does kind of get a lead just because he has a strong laning phase, but Ne Zha sets up really good ganks onto him with his prot shred and his lockdown from his 3. Nox. Really, really easy and good matchup into Ares. Easy ways to lock down Ares. Easy ways to interrupt Ares' abilities. She also has an okay laning phase, and she makes his laning phase worse because he can never really use his 3. She's safe into Ares. She shuts down a lot of what Ares wants to do with her lockdown and her damage reduction. I also think Nox can pretty freely walk into the jungle because if she ever sees the Ares, she just tosses her 2 down at Ares' feet and then she just dashes away, or she just 2-1s and then just walks away. Either way, pretty free matchup for Nox. I don't think this is too bad at any point in the game. Unfortunately, same thing is where if you have like a Xing Wei on your team, you're going to lose lane no matter what. But I like Nox into Ares. Ares into Shiva. Pretty unwinnable matchup for Shiva. Shiva wants to dive backliners. Ares can actually peel out his backliners really good into Shiva because of his protections. He also locks down the Shiva and forces out his ult really early. The one thing Shiva does have is his ult lasts very, very long, meaning if Ares ever tries to ult Shiva, Shiva can usually just ult it and even ult it at a bad time, like as soon as Ares ults and he's still fine. Shiva wants to win laning phase. Ares doesn't really allow that. Ares locks down or cripples a lot of Shiva's movement, and then he's also knock-up immune, so Yeah, very Aries sided. Sobek, we're going to put into +1, but I think this one's a little iffy. If Sobek gets a lead, Aries is just going to get plucked and fucked. But if this game is even, the match is even, or even if Aries is behind and he can hit a chain onto the Sobek who's plucking him, Sobek is just kind of, he's the one that's going to get fucked. It is very hard for Aries to kill the Sobek because a lot of the times the Sobek will just ult Aries ult. He's also just very, very tanky. He has good sustain, but Aries just dominates the lane because of how bad Sobek clear is. Aries can't get interrupted. If he does get interrupted, that means Aries or Sobek's using pluck, which again, what happens if you use your dash to interrupt Aries 3, you're just going to get chained and a lot of the times take damage or die. This is a matchup that I really like. Sylvanus into Aries. It's a skill matchup because both of them have skill shots that they need to hit. Sylvanus needs to hit his 3 and his 1. Aries needs to hit his chains, but Sylvanus does not really care about getting hit by chains. He just sustains through it with his 2. It gives him protections also, so he takes less damage. Also, he could heal it and give protections to his allies when Aries is trying to kill them. Sylvanus is fine trading ult if Aries ults him. And if Sylvanus a pull onto the Aries, a lot of times you can just blow the Aries up before he can even get any ability off. And you're just fine trading poke because Sylvanus is a sustained character. Sylvanus has also got a really good laning phase, obviously dependent on who your ADCs are, but I think Sylvanus has got a pretty solid matchup into Aries. Terra. If Terra wasn't as OP as she is, she'd be probably in a +2, but I think because she's so strong, we'll put her in +1. Terra can literally do nothing in this matchup. The one thing she has is she has an ability to lock him down with her 2, and she can do it out of range. Also, same kind of thing with Ganesha where she gets pulled in. She can just drop ult and she can try to kill the enemies as she's getting killed, but she gets locked down. She can't really win the laning phase. It's a very, very hard matchup for Terra, but I think really good Terras can make do with the matchup, but obviously it's still in Aries' favor. Aries will win laning phase. Aries is better in the mid game, and Aries just has a good matchup into late game, even though she's a better late game character overall. Xing Chen. Horrible, horrible matchup for Xing Chen. You can't use his 3 to avoid a lot of abilities because he's going to be getting chained. Aries just dominates the laning phase against Xing Chen. Xing Chen kind of wants to play like Aries does, but Aries just does it better, even into the late game. I also just think Xing Chen is a terrible character right now. Maybe it's just not fair. That's just the reality. Aries is just better than Xing Chen at everything. It's very hard for Aries to ult Xing Chen, but this doesn't really matter. All he has to do is just wait for Xing Chen to ult, and then it's just a game of chicken, and then who's got the better base kit. And Aries obviously has the better base kit. Yemoja. I think Yemoja dominates this matchup. Maybe even -2. We'll do -1 just because she doesn't have CC immunity. But a lot of times you can just build beads in this matchup, and because of how strong Yemoja's kit just is overall, you just kind of win. But I wouldn't be mad with a -2 matchup here. Everything Yemoja wants to do, she just does very well, and Aries doesn't really stop her. She lanes well. She can interrupt him. If she can hit a couple 1s in the laning phase, she'll actually win this laning phase. She trades really well into him because she won't die, and she can just sustain up. Her one worry is at level 5. If Aries beats her to it, she just gets ulted and then killed. But the upside is she can just 3 out of the cripple because her 3 doesn't get stopped by cripples for some reason. Yemoja, still one of the strongest characters in the game, still dominates this and a lot of other matchups, so -1 matchup for Yemoja. And then in my opinion, the absolute worst matchup for Aries is Ymir. Thinking about what they entirely want to do, Ymir just kind of shuts down Aries and then does what Aries wants to do, but better. Even though Aries is not, or Ymir is not a great character right now, I would still put this in a favorable matchup for Ymir. Ymir lanes well into him. He interrupts his abilities. He outtrades. His wall is a really good play into Aries. If Aries ever hits an ult, sometimes Ymir doesn't even have to ult it. He can just wall it and then walk up. If Ymir does just hit a sick wall onto Aries, he just walks up and ults, and then Aries is slowed and he can't get over the wall. Everything that you'd want to do as Aries, Ymir just kind of shuts it down and then just does it better and kind of turns it on its head. So I'm going to say a -2 matchup for Ymir, absolutely dominant, very, very free matchup. Obviously, you have to freeze Aries 3, otherwise you'll lose lane, but that's really the only thing, and it's not like it's that hard to hit Ymir freeze. I mean, it's a little hard, but it's not that hard. But there it is, the matchup chart. I don't know entirely what I was doing going into the video. I just know you guys want to see matchup charts. You want to see who's good into what. So this is an Aries one. If you guys do like it, remember, leave a like, comment that you liked it. Maybe I'll go ABC order, or if you guys have a god you want to see next, maybe comment that down below. The one that gets the most likes, if they're one that just gets a ton of likes, maybe I'll do that one. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys again next time. Peace.